afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. NFL Draft Week, round 1 is Thursday. Browns, barring a trade, will get involved in rounds 2 and 3 on Friday. 4 burning questions entering Draft Week for the Browns. This from Sports Illustrated. Number 1, will Andrew Berry make a pick at 54 or trade out of the spot? Number 2, with Nick Chubb still working his way back, what does the running back depth chart look like currently? Number 3, is trading Greg Newsome still a possibility for the Browns, or is he here to stay for 2024? And number 4, will Deshaun Watson really be ready for Week 1? Let's welcome in Scott Petrak. He's the Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram as well as brownzone.com. Let's start with number 1, Scott. 54. Do you think Andrew Berry trades? Does he make the pick? Do you have any idea?
This is an educated guess, right? Of just knowing Andrew Berry for the last handful of years. I think he winds up trading down. Now if there's 1 or 2 guys that he's got his heart set on that he thought maybe were top 40 picks and that guy's still there, then sure, you take it at 50. You take a guy at 54, or if nobody wants to move up. But if everything's equal, they just like extra picks. They don't have a ton this year. They don't have a ton, in the top 4 rounds this year. So I think he would be more inclined to move down and add a couple picks.
Yeah, and if you listen to most people's thoughts about the draft, 3rd, 4th round is where you can get some guys that can play in the league for a few years. And that's pretty much what they're doing. Nick Chubb working his way back. I would think, do you think they add a running back somewhere in the draft? I think they probably will.
Yeah, probably. I don't think it's a need, like we'll talk about 100 times. I don't think there's a pressing need anywhere. I think the depth chart is Jerome Ford, Dante Foreman, Pierre Strong, and then you have, Nakeem Hines, and that's a decent foursome. And then you don't know about Nick Chubb, right? So if you wanted to add a guy in the 5th round or somewhere like that to the mix, I think that's fine to do, and I wouldn't criticize them for doing that. But Chubb is such a big question mark. I don't think you can count him when you're looking at your depth chart. So I would say I'd probably put it at above 50-50 that they do draft a running back.
Yeah, I'm with you. 4th, 5th round, something like that. If one of the young guys, like an Estime or an Allen, is around, and they, to do that in the 4th round, they'd probably need to get a 4th round pick trading down. So I know we're going to talk. You've written a couple articles about Greg Newsome, but your thoughts just generically, do you think trading him is a possibility, or do you think he's here for 2024?
I wouldn't rule it out, but I don't think he's going in.
Yeah, again, what are you going to get for, are you really going to get something that you value as much as a cornerback who you think can be a starter in the league?
Yeah, well, I tried to kind of parse Andrew Berry's words last week when he talked about it. And, that can be dangerous. But his overall point was, we really value cornerbacks. We have 3 that can play press man at a high level, and we're not looking to give away that skill set. So when he throws in, and I'm paraphrasing, but I think it was looking to give away, to me that means they're not just going to trade him for nothing, right? So, yes, if somebody made a great offer for Greg Newsome, I think Andrew Berry would listen. Having said that, we're already into April. We're at the draft. Nobody's come with that kind of offer. I don't think it's coming this weekend, which means Greg Newsome is probably going to be here. And I think the Browns are fine with that. He's not making much money this year. If they pick up, and I assume they'll pick up the 5th-year option in a couple weeks by May 2nd, then it's still only less than $14 million for 2025. That fits in your salary cap structure with the importance of cornerback.
Yeah, especially the way they want to play defense under Jim Schwartz. All right, and the 4th one, will Deshaun Watson really be ready Week 1?
I think so. I haven't heard anything different, right? We've talked to Kevin Stefanski, Andrew Berry multiple times, Deshaun Watson multiple times. Everybody's optimistic he's going to be ready to go Week 1. Now there is some uncertainty when practice happens, right? When he first steps on the field for practice. But Andrew Berry said he threw 40 yards last week. Deshaun Watson said he's at full strength as far as speed. He can throw it as hard as he wants over short distances. He said his motion's good. All those things to me indicate the process is on the right track. And having said that, then the date of week 1 certainly seems reasonable, if not expected.
All right, we mentioned, I kind of teased this a little bit. You wrote a couple of articles. Andrew Berry places a high value on Greg Newsome, and Greg Newsome ignores all the trade rumors, reiterates his desire to stay. Take us through those, and then I have a theory that I want to throw at you coming up after you're done with that.
Okay. Yeah, we went to talk to Newsome at an event. He went to watch a girls' flag football practice at Berea Mid Park, and he said he's gotten good at ignoring the noise, right? That he doesn't focus on it, but his family and friends will say stuff. Hey, you're mentioning these trade rumors. He ignores it. He says, I know what my value is. He goes, I think the Browns know what my value is. He goes, I said it from day one. I want to play my whole career with one team. That means the Browns. So he's not looking to move, right? And I think he's way more comfortable and content and settled than he was coming off of 2022, right? He didn't like how Joe Woods used him. He liked better how Jim Schwartz, even though he still played a bunch in the slot, there's more man-to-man. There's more coverage responsibilities than the quasi linebacker that he thought Joe Woods was kind of misusing him in that way in 2022. And then Andrew Berry, it's like we talked about. You can't stress enough the importance of corner. Now, could the Browns make it work without Greg Newsome? Maybe, right? They drafted Cameron Mitchell last year. He played well when he was called upon. He's a 4th or 5th round pick. I don't know if it's fair to say that he could step in for Greg Newsome. Maybe they draft a guy high this year just because it's such an important position. But, if you have the number 1 defense, if you have Super Bowl aspirations, if you have what Denzel Ward said was the top cornerback group in the league, it just doesn't make sense to try to give one of those guys away, right? You'd have to be kind of knocked off your feet, and I think that's what Andrew Berry's waiting for, and I just don't think that offer is going to come.
So I think they're going to try to find a way to keep him even long term, just because they need, and Andrew Berry said it, they need 3 corners because the league goes to 3 wides. It's even more important because of the press man coverage. Jim Schwartz wants to create chaos at the line of scrimmage. You can't do that unless you have 3 guys that can play man-to-man coverage at a high level. I think they're going to try to find a way to pay him. Now, the concerning thing is Drew Rosenhaus is now his agent. That concerns me.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I get everything you're saying, and it makes complete sense. The only thing I struggle with is, you're paying Denzel Ward $20 million, right? Ballpark. Let's say you have to play Greg Newsome 15 at least. Martin Emerson's coming up, so then he'd be 15. Can you pay $50 million for your 3 corners? Maybe you can. Maybe they can make it work, and if they can, then yeah, I'm with you. But that's the concern I have. I would also say, they've shown, at least at this point, that they can draft corners. So maybe they're confident that, hey, if they have to let Newsome go, they can find a replacement. But you're right about his importance. He can play inside and out, and that's a tough skill. Like, Denzel Ward does not do that very often. I don't think Martin Emerson can play inside on a consistent basis. And I mentioned Cam Mitchell earlier. He can play in the slot. I don't know if he can play outside, right? So Newsome's almost a 2-for-1 guy for you.
Yeah, and the other thing is Denzel Ward you're always concerned concussion-wise with Denzel Ward. He's had a number of them, and that, I know it's football, but that's something. Concussions are something that you don't mess with. This is interesting. This is from Dogs by Nature. Browns contracts where top-paid stars rank at their position groups after free agency based on annual salary. So this is annual salary. Deshaun Watson 6th at quarterback. Wide receiver Amari Cooper is 17th. Remember the David Njoku contract nobody liked? He's the 8th paid tight end. Myles Garrett 5th at edge rusher. Tomlinson 22nd among defensive tackles. Denzel Ward 2nd among cornerbacks. Delpit 10th among safeties, and Juan Thornhill 17th among safeties. And still the Browns are able to do whatever they want to do relative to free agency year in and year out. The thing that is a little shocking, Denzel Ward is 2nd among corners still.
Right, and that contract was signed, 3 years ago, right? It's been a while now. Some of those guys seem underpaid, some seem a little overpaid on that scale, right? Juan Thornhill certainly did not play like the 17th best corner last year. Grant Delpit was probably close, but you're paying him for potential, right? You're keeping him. He recently signed, which means he's getting more money than guys who signed, a year ago, 2 years ago. You're right about David Njoku. I thought that contract was too much, and now he's certainly overperforming, being the 8th best corner. He's probably a top 4 or 5 tight end, top 4 or 5, 10 tight end in the league. Miles is above the 5th defensive end. And Deshaun Watson has not played, obviously, anywhere close to number 6 in the league since the Browns got him. So there's hits and misses, but it is interesting to see how many players are in the top, upper echelon on this roster.
Yeah, and GMs aren't going to always get contracts right, like they're not always going to get draft picks right, but there's a balance. So all in all, it's been pretty good for the Browns. This is really concerning. This from Warren Sharp. Percentage of drives that ended in a punt or turnover. And take a look at this for the Browns. 5th highest that ended in a punt or turnover, 61%. And that is the Patriots, Panthers, Jets, Giants. That is not the neighborhood you want to be in relative to that. It just goes to show you how good or how much they had to work around the turnovers.
Yeah, to me it shows. They won 11-6, right? Went to the playoffs. Shows you how good the defense was,
right? And
how they were able to overcome inconsistent quarterback play, right? They won games with P.J. Walker, who turned it over a ton. They won games with Joe Flacco, who turned it over more than desired, right? So they were able to make it work despite some things going against them, some big things going against them.
Scott Petrak and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, we'll hear Kevin Stefanski talking about Deshaun Watson and keeping him healthy. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Play Maximum Millions and $2 Million Ultimate Cash from the Ohio Lottery, and you may never look at scratch-offs the same way again.
We continue talking Browns with Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle Telegram, as well as BrownsZone.com. Kevin Stefanski on ESPN Cleveland last week late, talking about Deshaun Watson, keeping him healthy and on the field.
Obviously, the quarterback wants to take care of himself as much as you can. You'd love to go through a game and say, hey, your jersey's not going to get dirty. That's not realistic when you're playing that position. Mm-hmm. But you always want to take those big hits off of you when you can. So we always talk with the quarterbacks about sliding. When you're out in a crowd, when there's nobody around you, sliding. When you're in the crowd, how to get down and protect yourself. When you're along the sideline, how to protect yourself. That's where the big hits are coming.
Yes, sideline.
But this game, when you're in that pocket, it gets loud in there. He's got an innate way to navigate that thing. And then God's blessed him with the ability to make plays off schedule. So yeah, it's always going to be a part of protecting yourself. We'll always message that with him, but that's the NFL.
And Scott, you can't take the aggressiveness out of a guy because that even leads more to getting injured.
Yeah, it's a fine balance, Dave. It's hard. It's a delicate balance. I keep flashing back to week 3 against Tennessee. They're winning the game. He doesn't need to lower the shoulder, and he takes a direct hit on it, right? Like, would the Browns be better off if he had gone down 2 yards earlier? Yeah, and I don't know how you talk a guy out of that. I don't know how you coach him out of that. It's difficult, but I think the best quarterbacks find that balance, and they know, and they're smarter about it than maybe Watson was on that particular play. I look at Lamar Jackson. I know he's been hurt from time to time, but he doesn't take a lot of direct hits. And, he's probably a little slipperier than Watson is, but there's a way to do it. It's apples to oranges a little bit, but Dustin Hopkins is trying to chase down that kickoff guy, that kickoff return. He shouldn't have. Like, it's not good for the team for you to run hard enough where you pull a hamstring if you're a kicker. And it's not smart for the team for you to put yourself in harm's way with the direct shot to your shoulder. And it's not like you're in the pocket. You're not making a throw in the fourth quarter. You're running. So I do think Watson can get better at that.
I'm curious to your take on this. We heard Watson talk about the remade offense. Seemed excited about it. From what he said, do you think this offense is going to look drastically different next season?
I'll tell you what, Dave, I struggle with that. And I don't think I can give a complete answer this early. Like when I wrote the story last week after Watson talked, I put new in quotation, right? Like the new offense. And I did that because the number one guy is still there. Kevin Stefanski is still the major architect of this offense. I know they have Ken Dorsey. I know Ken Dorsey's running the meetings. I know he's bringing elements to this offense. But I expect Kevin Stefanski to call the plays. And even if he doesn't, he's still got his fingerprints all over this offense. So it's tough for me to say it's going to look drastically different than it did last year or than it did in 2022. Now, I think we saw signs of change last year, and we'll see more of that. You know, we talk about three wides. We talk about more shotgun. I do think you'll see that. Deshaun Watson mentioned more freedom for the receivers, more freedom for himself. Spread. He's used the word spread. So if you see more of that and we see the Browns in, four wides and it's a lot of shotgun and everybody's spread out, then I would say, yes, it's significantly different. But I need to see more of it because I have a hard time thinking Kevin Stefanski is going to completely get away from, running it. And if Nick Chubb's healthy, you got to get the ball to Nick Chubb, right? So I think we'll see tweaks, but I'm not ready to say it'll be a new offense.
So I know you also wrote an article about this, and Andrew Berry addressed it. Likes how the team has handled a lack of first-round picks, but he's happy to get them back starting next year.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about they don't have any pressing needs, right? That means the roster's in a pretty good shape. They won 11-6 last year. That means they played well, and we talked about all the circumstances. So it's hard to say, man, those 3 first-round draft picks that they gave up for Deshaun Watson are hindering them to such a degree because they've overcome it. Now, it's not because of Deshaun Watson, right? He's only played 11-plus games. So organizationally, they've been able to overcome what right now looks like a really bad trade and the lack of draft picks. And I think Barry's done it creatively, using a 5th-round pick to get Amari Cooper, using 5th and 6th-round picks to get Jerry Jeudy. Trading for Zadarius Smith, right? Hardly giving up anything, and you get Zadarius Smith, a starting defensive end. Re-signing Smith, keeping some of your other guys, hitting on a draft pick like Martin Emerson Jr. and like DeJuan Jones. Those are the kind of moves necessary when you're not getting any contribution from the first or even first and second rounds in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and the trade for Elijah Moore didn't work out last year. Let's, not ready to say that was a complete bust just yet. This is power rankings for all 32 teams before the NFL draft. This from PFF. They have the Chiefs 1, 49ers 2, Ravens 3, Bengals 9, Bills 10, Jaguars 11, Browns 12, Seahawks 13. For the Browns, biggest loss, Joe Flacco. Biggest gain, Jerry Jeudy. Browns receivers ranked 29th in receiving grade last season, so adding Jerry Jeudy was a good move. Well, I mean, the unstated there is they started 4 different quarterbacks, P.J. Walker a couple of times. 12 seems kind of low for the roster. And I guess they're downgrading it based on Deshaun Watson, I'm guessing.
That has to be it, right? And I don't know if I would argue with them too much, right? You need to see him. You need to see him on the field, stay healthy, get back to who he was, get back to how he played against the Ravens, right? That stretch right before he had season-ending surgery. I think it is interesting when Joe Flacco's the biggest loss, and that's probably true. Who else would be in the mix? Anthony Walker Jr., Sione Takitaki, right? Like, those guys left. They were starters. But Flacco had such a big impact, but in a perfect world, he wouldn't even play this year, right? So I think that speaks to the quality of the roster. I think I'd put him behind the Bengals and Bills, and we're assuming Joe Burrow's going to be healthy. Dolphins at 7 is interesting. Jaguars at 11, I would quibble with that. I haven't seen enough from them to say that they deserve to be ranked ahead of the Browns.
Yeah, the Bills, the reason I scratched my head, Stephon Diggs is gone, Gabe Davis is gone, you're going to have a rookie. The running back positions, I mean, I know you got Josh Allen, but Josh Allen's got to be going, can you get me some help, please?
Yeah, no, you're right. There's some question marks in Buffalo, certainly, but that's all about Josh Allen, right? And they got a pretty good defense, but then they'll let both those safeties go too this offseason.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a rebuild or a restructuring for Buffalo. It'll be interesting to see how they play.
Yeah, I'm with you. Josh Allen gives you a little bit of confidence that whatever you get in, they'll figure it out. Scott Petrak and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll turn our attention to the draft. We begin talking some defensive tackles. Sports for CLE. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram. You can also check him out on brownzone.com on the internet. All right, ESPN's First Take, our first draft podcast with Mel Kiper Jr., Field Yates, talked about value picks in the upcoming draft. One of the guys they liked, Ohio State's Michael Hall.
Michael Hall Jr. should not be overlooked, Mel. He had a sack and a half last year. All right, that number is not going to blow you away by any stretch. But with Michael Hall Jr. betting on a player whose disruption was consistent. Now he's smaller. He's under 200. He's under 300 pounds, I should say. He's a guy that is going to have his moments where offensive linemen get the best of him. But Michael Hall Jr. to me, one of my favorite interior disruptors, and we're seeing more and more teams these days, Mel, prioritize guys that live behind the line of scrimmage amongst defensive linemen. We don't have as many guys who are sitting there holding the point of attack. I was talking about how 15 years ago, Casey Hampton, a nose tackle, drafted out of University of Texas, right, Mel? Like that role, that play, he was an awesome player, by the way. But the number of teams that are saying, we're just looking for a guy that can basically take up space for our linebackers and other defensive linemen to do work, that role has been diminished in the NFL. So guys like Michael Hall Jr. that can live behind the line of scrimmage, I think are way more valuable.
Scott, when you hear, the reason I play that, you hear the description of what he does well. Sure sounds like somebody you'd line up next to Dalvin Tomlinson.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. You look at some of these D-tackle candidates and prospects, and there's not a ton of sack production, but that's what everybody's looking for. And those disruption numbers matter. And it's not all about sacks. So we've learned that lesson. Hall's interesting, right? I mean, everything Field was talking about. A little bit undersized, but quick, can get in the backfield. Local kid, I think he grew up in Cleveland and moved to Streetsboro. He's interesting when you talk about that Jim Schwartz attack front. That's what they're looking for, which is why the Ika pick last year it's still a little bit of a head scratcher, right? Because he's so big. He's not a burst up the field guy, even though maybe he can still do that. The Browns believe he can. But physically, that doesn't scream out, get up the field, right? Because he's 340 pounds.
So I know you're also working on an article about another guy that's kind of similar. He's a little bit bigger, taller, lanky, defensive tackle Mason Smith from LSU. Take us through what you have working on, and again, you're working on an article on Smith.
Yeah, it should be posted by tomorrow morning. Talked to him at the Combine and really liked the conversation with him, and I think he fits. He met with the Browns at the Combine. I think he can, he's 6'5", like 306. So he's, not huge from a weight perspective, right? But he's tall. He's got that height that sometimes you're looking for inside. I talked to one of his coaches at LSU, Pete Jenkins, a longtime D-line coach, and he thinks he's a better passer. He says he's good against the run, but he thinks his future is a really good pass rusher, can do it from the interior, was a 5-star recruit, #1 recruit in Louisiana, had an ACL, had a bunch of different D-line coaches because There's issues at LSU. One of the guys got sick. So it's never really settled for him. Had a good freshman year, then got hurt in the opener his second year, then had all these defensive line guys as coaches as he worked back from the ACL. So I think he's a guy, it's a prospect with a lot of potential, a lot of upside. He said he met with Jim Schwartz and they talked about attacking, and that's what he would be good at. And he'd love to learn from Myles Garrett. So I think he's an interesting guy. At 54, even if he slides into the third round or the Browns trade down in the second round, maybe he'd still be there, 10, 15 picks later. I just think there's a tremendous upside with him. He's a smart guy. Everybody you talk to says he works hard. I think he's interesting. And, we talk about the Browns not having any needs or pressing needs, and I really believe that. But if you're going to have me list what I think their biggest needs right now are, the young D tackle would be in the top 2 or 3.
Well, the other thing Andrew Berry keeps saying is they'll invest their capital in the areas they think that are big. That's offensive line, defensive line, and cornerbacks. We know that. That's what they value. That's what history has told us. So those would, and both the offensive line and defensive line are older.
Yes, you're 100% right. And I think there's 2 points there, Dave. The defensive line outside of Ika, right, who we saw very little from, is a rookie last year. It's an older group. Tomlinson's 30, I want to say. Shelby Harris is 32, I think. Maurice Hurst II is 28. Quentin Jefferson's 31. So it's kind of Ika and then a bunch of older guys. So, yeah, you want to get younger there. And Andrew Berry talks about thinking about when he drafts, thinking about 2, 3, 4 years down the road. Okay, that's where a guy like Mason Smith or any of these D tackles could fit. And then I think they've made a little bit of a switch in organizational philosophy when it comes to D tackle. Because for a while they weren't paying big money, right? They let Larry Ogunjobi go in free agency. They didn't re-sign Sheldon Richardson, and that was a money issue, if I remember correctly. And then with the hiring of Jim Schwartz, they went out and paid Dalvin Tomlinson. They drafted Ika, and I think there's a bit of a shift there to put more priority on the interior of the defensive line.
All right. This is from the Bleacher Report. Draft sleepers who could become household names as rookies. They're going to start with Karan Emagia, and it's an offensive tackle from Yale. If he didn't suffer a quad injury that ended his 2023 season, we'd potentially be talking about a surefire top 45 pick. Massive man, 6'5", 325, touts length. Arms are 36 and an eighth. Athleticism, technique to project as a day one starter on Sunday. Malik Washington, wide receiver, second team All-American, his lone year at Virginia. Foot quickness, elite hands, present a high floor as a projected depth wideout on Sundays. Route tree showcased heavy dose of timing and out routes. Landed an NFL attack, allows receivers to attack different depths. Ultimately heighten his performance ceiling. He's only 5'8". He is solid, but he's like 5'8". Roger Rosengarter, offensive tackle, Washington, although lacks elite athletic profile, lack of technicality at the position could present a path to snaps at guard, nasty demeanor in the run game, ability to win right tackle, failed to allow a sack in his college career, 1,200 pass snaps. Scott, we were talking about this. Washington's 5'8". I think he's about 195, something like that, so he's bigger. I don't see them drafting a 5'8" wide receiver. And I know that they need to get younger on the line. I think they need to get younger on the interior. So if you're drafting Rosengarten and thinking of him as a guard, that's probably more so. They drafted Dwan Jones. They have one of their starting tackles who's coming into his second year.
Yeah, there's a couple things there, Dave. I'm with you about tackle. If they drafted a guy, the Yale kid, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name. If they drafted him at 54, that's a signal that they're done with Jed Wills, or they plan on being done with Jed Wills after 2024. And I just have never gotten that. I've just never gotten that sentiment from anybody within the organization. They'll admit there's ups and downs. They think he's on the right trajectory. They've invested heavily in him so far. Now maybe they've changed, right? Maybe they've decided, hey, that's a spot where we can save money. We'll go young. We'll get rid of Wills and not pay him big money that you'd have to at left tackle. but I just haven't gotten that indication yet. So that a tackle pick would surprise me, and I think it might signal something. I think they do need to get younger in the interior of the line, offensive line. I wouldn't do that until later in the draft, day 3. And then the Washington, it's interesting. I've seen that name, and it was like popping in my head. He played at Northwestern for 4 years, like that graphic showed. He was good at Northwestern. You're right. Not the biggest guy, is a playmaker, can produce. But, when you're drafting a guy that size, you got to be careful how high you take him.
Yeah, without question. All right, before we go to break, you wrote an article on Cade Stover. Take us through your thoughts on the guy from Ohio State tight end.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think the Browns could use another tight end. You got David Njoku, and then to me, there's a gap between Giovanni Ricci, Jordan Akins. I think they could use a number 2. I like Cade Stover. Ohio State people know him. Obviously, he's got a great story, and I follow Ohio State, but not super closely. I did not know all the ins and outs. They call him Farmer Gronk. He grew up on a farm in Mansfield. Is super proud of that. Really passionate about it. Wants to get done playing in the NFL, go back, and it's a family farm and continue that tradition. I talked to his tight end coach at Ohio State, who raves about him. And Cade got asked about PFF gave him a bad blocking grade, and he got offended by that. And you can see the intensity and the passion when he talks about it. And I found him fascinating. I think the story's fascinating. I think he's going to be a good NFL player, and I think he could be a fit for the Browns. And the tight ends coach said he's talked, I think his quote was ad nauseum to the Browns. So interesting guy to keep an eye on.
The one thing that jumps out about him, threat in the passing game, and he can block. I mean, if you've seen him, he can block. The PFF grades we can talk about all the time. He can block.
Yeah, he can catch and he can block. And, the coach, Keenan Bailey, said NFL scouts ask him about him as a route runner, and he says, hey, he was our number 2 receiver behind Marvin Harrison Jr. In some games, he had more catches than Marvin Harrison Jr. He can go out and play, and he can do it all from that tight end position. And those guys, you can't find a whole lot of guys that are the dual skill tight ends these days.
Scott Petrick and I are going to step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, we continue to talk NFL draft. Browns will make their first pick in all likelihood on Friday. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns with Scott Petrick, Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram. This one from the Bleacher Report. Teams that need a strong 2024 draft class after a quiet free agency. They say the Browns. Free agent spending $67.3 million. Good news for the Browns is that isn't a roster with a lot of glaring needs, and they weren't completely quiet in free agency, swinging a trade for Jerry Jeudy, adding a veteran presence at linebacker and Jordan Hicks. If Barry makes a pick at 54, expect depth along the offensive line to be a priority, especially at tackle, where the Browns' top 3 options at the position are coming off injury-marred seasons. I don't see how, if the roster doesn't have any glaring holes, this is an important draft. And the thing is, they have 3 guys who have started and had success at tackle in the NFL. So other than that, I don't have any problems with what they're saying.
Yeah, that ranking seems like a stretch. And where I quibble with the injury, I get it, right? All your 3 tackles are rehabbing injuries. It would seem a logical connection. However, Jack Conklin's the only guy of the 3 with like a long history, right, of injuries. You know, Jedrick Wills got rolled up on. You know, he had an MCL tear, I think. DeJuan Jones, same kind of thing. So, you know, I don't think you can say if they fully expect all three guys to be healthy week one. I think the two younger guys, Wills and Jones, there's no reason to think that they're going to struggle to come back from these injuries, right? So I think that's a little flawed. Now, I could be wrong, and maybe they take a tackle high, and we're going to have to go over this conversation again, but that narrative doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, so Dane Brugler, who actually a local guy, is the national writer for The Athletic. Let's take a look at his mock draft for the Browns. So this is what he has the Browns do. He does a 7-page thing. He does a 300-page draft Bible, so he does as much work on the draft as anybody. In his latest mock draft, he has the Browns taking Mason Smith at 54. Then in the third round, we're just going to refer to him as the tackle from Yale. I've been butchering his name for the last 3 weeks, and I'm tired of mispronouncing his name. And then they have Taj Washington, wide receiver from USC, linebacker from Notre Dame, Isaiah Davis, and then a guard in the 7th round. I wouldn't be surprised at all if, in fact, they take Mason Smith, or if they trade back and get Mason Smith. Again, I'm not sure that offensive tackle would be something they take that high. Unless, if they think this guy's going to be a stud, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and Dane does such a good job. He calls it the beast. And there's a million players in there, and I rely on that heavily when I do my stuff. It's really a good read. You know, you can find it on Twitter. It's The Athletic. He does such a good job. The thing about the tackle from Yale is if it's at 85 and you think he's a day one starter, right? You think he's a top 40 player, 45 player, then you can talk yourself into it, right? And, hey, we only have Wills for one more year right now. And Conklin's coming back off, all these things, right? Then I think it's an easier sale to the fans or to whomever, right? That, hey, maybe this guy doesn't play right now, but we love him. Maybe he can play right now. It gives you so much flexibility. It's an important position. Obviously, tackle's a premium position. So at that spot, I like it way better at 85, let's say, than at 54.
And again, I'm assuming you wouldn't be surprised at all if Mason Smith is somebody that the Browns take.
No, I think he's in that. You know, when we talk about if they stay at 54, he's in that. To me, he's in that mix with, you know, Hall from Ohio State, Chris Jenkins from Michigan, from the D tackle perspective, and then throw in that group of receivers. Right? Is it Roman Wilson? Is it Forley from Western Kentucky? Is it Leggett from, I think, South Carolina, right? The kid from Oregon. Like, you can go down the list. There's a bunch of candidates. And to me, at 54, receiver and D-tackle make the most sense.
Yeah, the other thing is, because there's so many teams that are going to overdraft a quarterback. I mean, the Browns were stuck in that cycle until they made the Watson trade. One of those guys is going to, either a wide receiver or a D-tackle, heck, it might even be an offensive of lineman that you think is much better than 54 is going to be staring at you there.
Yeah, that's part of it, right? Who gets pushed up the board, and quarterbacks usually do most of the pushing. And the other part of it is, you know, every team and every evaluator is different. And the Browns will like guys that the Steelers won't and the Ravens won't. Some of it's scheme fit, some of it's what your scouts like, some of it's what you uncover in your research, right? So just because a guy's there doesn't mean he doesn't deserve to be taken right there. And the Browns will trust their board, and if a guy that they had ranked highly starts to fall or is still there, I don't think they would hesitate to pounce.
All right, before I let you go, this is one prospect from each team that they should avoid in the 2024 NFL Draft. This is from the Bleacher Report. For the Browns, they say Chris Jenkins. Browns front office has an analytical bent, so it should understand the positional value that comes with finding a wide receiver, edge rusher, or cornerback in the second round. Chris Jenkins is a good run-stuffing defensive tackle prospect, has a high ceiling as a pass rusher due to his athleticism, but he hasn't demonstrated that on the field much. Added adding to their defensive interior depth should be a project for later on day 2 or day 3. I don't know. That again, some of these things seem to be talking in circles. If he has high ceiling as a pass rusher, that's a skill from the defensive tackle position that's valuable.
Right. Now, his sack numbers were not great, but he's got the pedigree, right? His dad and uncle played in the league. Dad was a 4-time Pro Bowler. He doesn't have the same height as his dad did. I listened to him at the Combine, too, and liked him. I think he could step in. He knows the life in the NFL. And it's like all these things at the draft, right? You're betting on the come. You think he's going to get better. You think your system's going to free him up. Whatever it is, you put more talent around him. Not that there wasn't a lot of talent in Michigan, but you put him on the same line as Myles Garrett and Zadarius Smith, and maybe he can flourish, right? Because I think he does have some of the traits that the Browns will be looking for.
Scott Petrak, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Scott.
Thanks, Dave.
Scott Petrak, make sure you check him out, brownzone.com on the internet. He is also the Browns beat reporter for the Elyria Chronicle-Telegram. We're going to continue talking Browns. Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast straight ahead. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
Play Maximum Millions and $2 million Ultimate Cash from the Ohio Lottery, and you may never look at scratch-offs the same way again.
I am powerful beyond my wildest imagination.
I will define my future.
I will keep challenging myself to improve.
Because I am a future leader of this great nation.
I will be responsible for raising a beautiful family.
And educating not only my generation, but many more to come.
I will make a difference in my community.
And I will stand up for what I believe in.
I will not settle for simply chasing my dreams. I will achieve them.
Because I was given a chance.
An opportunity.
A home.
At Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America.
The ultimate leadership experience.
FCCLA has been one of the greatest experiences of my life.
It's made me who I am today.
Join us. We'll build a new future together.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hi, Dave. This is Jerry. Love your show. I've got some questions for you. With the new kickoff rules, man, are they going to have to add more speed to the return team and to the kickoff team? Thank you very much. Bye now.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Let's welcome in Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast. Jeff, nobody knows for certain what the new kickoff rules will mean, but lining up guys 10 yards away from each other, the return team's going to get on the return guys a little quicker.
It's not going to be that much different as far as personnel, in my opinion. I think you're still going to be talking about, your linebackers, your tight ends, your wide receivers, your defensive backs. That's who's going to be on the fields for these. I don't think, anybody's going to change their philosophy as far as the kicking game, as far as kickoff or return. That all of a sudden now we're going to be incorporating offensive linemen into this. Because the problem is it's a lot of space to have a 330-pound guy accidentally have somebody roll up the back of his leg. I think it's going to be still the game plan is personnel-wise is probably not going to change. It's going to be athletes on athletes, which has always been the way the return game has been in the NFL.
All right, so Browns signed an offensive lineman, Jermaine Ifedi. I know you dealt with this Locked On Browns podcast. What do you find interesting about that?
The Browns, as far as their offensive line situation, almost everybody is kind of like tied to a spot. we don't know who another left tackle is technically on this roster. The best of James Hudson we've seen has been at right tackle. Of course, that is where Conklin plays. That, of course, for now is where DeJuan Jones plays. Batonio's a guard. Teller's a guard. Posic's a center. Whippler, you drafted last year as a center. Afidi is one guy that comes in. He has over 40 career starts as a right tackle. He has over 20 career starts as a right guard. So I'm not saying that a Jermaine Afidi is automatically going to make this final offensive line roster. There's still a lot of time to go between now, certainly, and the end of August. But that's versatility, and it's experience at two different positions. So the Browns, they're probably still going to carry 9 or 10 any way you slice it, but having one guy that is easily capable of jumping in and starting at two positions. There's not a lot the Browns have that way right now currently on the roster. So that makes it interesting from that standpoint. I know some people were wondering whether or not there was a crossover between he and new offensive line coach Andy Dickerson in their time in Seattle. There was none. But this is a guy that does have some true versatility, that he has started a lot at more than one spot on the offensive line in the NFL.
How many locks do you think there are on the O-line? Again, I know you dealt with that on the Locked On Browns podcast.
Well, I mean, the starting five, and you figure for right now, Jack Conklin is your right tackle. So obviously that is Jedrick, that is Joel Bitonio, that is Ethan Posick. Of course, that is Wyatt Teller, that is Jack. There is your five. You figure DeJuan Jones obviously is a lock in what capacity his role is going to be, where he plays. And it's a tough position, but it's also a great position for the Browns to be in. They have two tackles, veterans that they're okay with. They have a budding star that they're in love with. It's a great position for them to be in. So there's your six. Dunn, obviously, is your swing guard. There's your seventh guy. He was signed for over $1 million guaranteed. He's not going anywhere. You need a backup center, Luke Whippler, right there, drafted last year. A lot of people felt he was a year away. Hopefully this offseason has gone exactly what the Browns were hoping for, and he will be the eventual future starting center for the Cleveland Browns. That's 8 right there. Then you bring up a name like Jermaine Afidi, a guy who has started at two positions more than 20 times in his NFL career. James Hudson, you go to that Baltimore Raven game last year where the Browns went down to Baltimore and they kept running the ball over the right side behind Wyatt Teller and behind James Hudson, and Jerome Ford probably had his best statistical day in yards per carry, because I know that's been a huge thing with folks about Jerome Ford, and he had a monster day that day. And James Hudson was just bodying dudes from the right tackle position. I'm not saying Hudson's a lock, and we all know the rumors are there that the Browns are going to be heavily interested in drafting some young offensive linemen, which I understand. You have a brand new offensive line coach. He wants to start to put his feel into the room. But for me, that's 8 right there. And, Afidi, hey, maybe it works out. He makes this team. Maybe it works out where, Browns love to do this late in the summer. Hey, I can't keep the guy. You had an injury. I'll take a potential day 3 pick, da-da-da-da-da. But there's already 8 guys, in my opinion, that are going to make the Cleveland Browns offensive line. Of course, that's not counting injury and any of that other stuff.
All right, this one from the Bleacher Report. 3 prospects the Browns must consider at 54. They go Kamari Lassiter, cornerback from Georgia. Schwartz leans heavily on single high. He does like to mix things up. Lassiter has the versatility to thrive in Schwartz's scheme as an early rotational player. Wouldn't be a liability in run support. Ladd McConkey, wide receiver, Georgia. Very intriguing option for the Browns. Good size, 6 foot, 186 pounds. Reliable hands after the catchability. Positional versatility. Big question is whether he'll actually be available later in the second round. Yeah, that's a huge question. And then they go Jeremiah Trotter, an adept pass rusher, capable blitzer, would make him valuable in a division that features Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Russell Wilson. I don't see Ladd McConkey being there, and I don't see either of the other guys being on the Browns' radar at 54. Just your opinion.
Yeah, this is a tough one. Look, if Ladd McConkey's there at 54, that's kind of a slam dunk selection. I think he is just somebody that has so much athletic ability. The tape was really solid. And Georgia isn't one of these teams that plays like modern college football teams. Georgia always invests in recruiting. They have great offensive linemen. We've seen that the last few years. They like to run the ball. They play good defense. Georgia can go out and play a style if they wanted to, and recruit the type of athletes where they would win games 80-13. It's just not the way they do it. They want to play shorter games. They play good defense. They want to run the ball. They want to expose a lot of players, because when you are a blue chip program and you keep bringing in these 5-star recruits, there's got to be playing time for these guys, which means, guys are getting pulled third quarter, if not earlier. But Ladd McConkey certainly could have put up more statistical production in his time in Georgia. He's going to be a great NFL player. Lassiter, look, I'm not against drafting a corner, and, you read the tea leaves. That's something the Browns are always going to do. I mean, you have a head coach who was a defensive back. You have a general manager who was a defensive back. And, basically you're saying, well, do you need a corner? You're bringing in somebody to, compete for cornerback 5, cornerback 6, compete with Khalif Lassie, who played last year, but not a ton. It wouldn't be shocking for the Browns not to do that. But the thing is you're drafting cornerback 5, drafting cornerback 6 at 54. I don't know where that makes sense because you do have bigger pressing needs elsewhere. Jeremiah Trotter's tape is phenomenal, but there's always that issue with guys who don't test. And I know we're reaching this point, and the Marvin Harrison Jr.'s of the world, they can do whatever they want. Jeremiah Trotter Jr., however, those testing numbers, combined with the fact that he is an older prospect and the fact that we have no numbers, I think Jeremiah Trotter ultimately is going to be a guy who's going to get drafted on day 3. I love his tape. I think he's a guy who looks like he was a son of a solid Hall of Fame player. You see it in his tape, but numbers and lack of them scare people. The Browns want a linebacker. Look, there's guys who did everything. There's also guys who had a higher tackle percentage. Junior Colson out of Michigan did not miss a lot of tackles in his time in college football. So of those names, I mean, yeah, McConkey would be the belle of the ball. The other two, I don't think they would be names the Browns would be entertaining at 54.
Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast, and I can step aside, take a quick time out. We'll tell you who they might be talking about at 54 and 85. We continue talking Browns draft on Sports4CLE. Stay with us.
Play Maximum Millions and $2 million Ultimate Cash from the Ohio Lottery, and you may never look at scratch-offs the same way again.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE with Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast. This from Pro Football Focus. Trevor Sikkema, 7th-round mock draft at 54. He has the Browns selecting Keon Coleman, wide receiver from Florida State, an impressive 6'4", 215-pound athlete who enjoys getting physical with cornerbacks as he constantly catches pass through contact. Didn't have great 40 time, so he's fallen down some boards. 85, Dominic Pooney, offensive tackle from Kansas. First season with the Jayhawks was left guard. Pooney displayed bad posture, poor pad level. That made him susceptible to rushers and didn't allow him to really maintain blocks. Posture was better in 2023 as a left tackle. And although he was still standing taller than preferred, conscious of leverage, dropped his pad level before contact. So Pooney's a guy who has been connected with the Browns in a lot of mock drafts. Jeff, when you look at Coleman and Pooney, what do you think?
Well, Coleman I really like. And look, everybody wants to talk about the Northeast and obviously the AFC North and playing in elements. And look, Keon Coleman, there's just not a lot of separation in his routes. But at 6'4", 215 pounds, you don't necessarily need a lot of separation. He can run drags, he can run posts, he can run slants, he can run square ins. And the other thing is he has really good yard after catch ability. Last year, Florida State was in a pinch late in the season. They didn't really have a punt returner. And it's kind of odd that you look at the 6'4", 215-pound guy and say, hey, let's give him a shot. But he had a bunch of big-time returns, had a huge one against Miami that ended up sealing the victory over the Hurricanes. Kind of brings a bigger physical presence to that wide receiver room. Look, none of these guys are really over 200 pounds. Coop is listed at 200. I don't know if anybody believes Amari Cooper is legit 200. Judy, we know, is under 200. We know Elijah Moore is under 200. Cedric Tillman is obviously a bigger receiver. Keon Coleman's fun. Offensive line, I think it's all about your flavor. And who you like. I mean, me personally, there's a Blake Fisher at Notre Dame. I just like the feistiness. I just like the drive. He's just a mean old cuss. He's only 21 years old, but he's always got that grumpy old man to him already. Roger Rosengarten, just a bigger, longer guy. When I talk about Fisher, I talk about Rosengarten. Both of these guys could have been left tackles at their respective universities, but both of them we're playing with guys who are left tackles that are probably going to be drafted in the first round. You know, you're not going to beat that guy out as the younger guy in the room, essentially. Both are really good players. Both have high futures, have high ceilings. Puny as well. But the other thing is Puny, it took a while. You gravitate. Now you went to guard, then you moved out. I mean, the whole process for him, it's a little bit interesting. There's some guys I prefer. I do love Trevor Sakama's work. But there's guys I just prefer at that spot. But again, it may be something that we're not sure of here. It's kind of hard to read the tea leaves when you have a brand new offensive line coach. We've had the same guy that we've been watching players and understanding what Bill Callahan likes for 4 years. Now it is a new guy. It's a whole different thing. They're going to get him a guy or two. I know that. But we don't really necessarily know what his flavor of choice is just yet.
All right. I know you've dealt with this on the Locked on Browns podcast. If the Browns go offense, 54 and 85, who are some names that you think make sense?
I keep going back to this. And now, look, if the Browns are going to go offense at 54, you got to think there's a guy that you think can contribute right away. So you look at the positional groups, and look, as much as I kind of really, really love this running back class, I can see where if the Browns say, hey, look, we got this, Nick Chubb. And look, a lot of this is based on the fact that we don't know when Nick's going to return. Then you look at the wide receiver room, all right? You know who the top three are. You know, Bell had some meaningful plays late in the season. Cedric Tillman, I will continue to say that I think he played pretty good in a tough situation last year for a rookie when it was a brand new quarterback almost every week. So where is this rookie wide receiver jumping in, and where is he jumping in the pecking order? You look at that tight end position, Dave, and look, we all know what David is, and we all know how great David is. But you look at the rest of that room, Akins, he's still here, maybe. I mean, he's on the roster. It didn't seem to do much for the team last year. The Gio Ricci story is really, really nice, local kid and all. I don't think that's going to move the needle at all. But you know Brock Bowers is going to be gone. But if there is a chance, the second best tight end in this class, which in my opinion is probably Benson out of Kansas State, if he's available, and for the Browns, maybe it's a luxury pick. You're not going to use him a ton. Well, maybe it's a luxury pick now, but if you thought this guy was a top 50 player, and just because, you have all these receivers, you have running backs, and he might not be a big focal point of your offense early on, either A, he'll find a way to get in there, or B, maybe he's not used a lot early in his career because it does become a bigger factor later in his career. Now, you get to 85. Now, to me, that's where I think the running back spot would really probably be the sweet spot. You keep looking at these running back rankings from all these drafted analysts, and they keep pushing these guys down even further and further and further. So if you can get an Audric Estime, Marshawn Lloyd, I think he kind of is a little bit like Jerome Ford in the fact that he can do a little bit of everything. So basically, when you're making moves, bringing one running back in, taking one running back out, you don't have a tell. If the Browns had Jerome Ford on the field, or they had Marshawn Lloyd on the field, or they had Nyheim Hines on the field, you don't necessarily have a tell because all three guys are capable of taking some carries. All three guys are certainly capable of going out and running routes. I think a guy like Marshawn Lloyd would fit. But 54, 85, I think you're looking for, the offensive line, I get it. I truly do. And it is one thing to talk about because the Browns have that gap from 85 to 155. That is 70 spots in this draft. And once you get to 155, you're talking about a whole different type of offensive lineman. But you can go skill at 54 and 85. The Browns can get a really, really nice return here.
All right, before I let you go, who is a favorite wide receiver for the Browns, and who would be a favorite defensive tackle for the Browns?
Ooh, if you're going to do it to me like this, we're going to go Michael Hall. I think Michael Hall and Jim Schwartz are a match made in heaven. This is a guy that should be able to put up 7-8 sacks a season rushing from the interior. And keep in mind, Michael Hall got himself up at 299 for the draft process. So it's not like graduating to 300 pounds and being a full-time defensive tackle is going to be difficult. The wide receiver class, it's just so hard. But I'll go with either of the two Washington kids not named Rome Odunze. Jalen Polk is just a quiet, silent assassin. He just really does his gig. Jalen McMillan was the third guy out there and kind of mostly played slot and power slot. But there's an outside receiver in there. He did what he was told. He played the good, soldier, so to speak. But these guys all played with a guy that everybody thinks is probably going to go somewhere in the top 40 in Michael Penix. So gravitating to the NFL life, being able to ready to contribute right away, shouldn't be a shock for any one of these guys. But you want bang for your buck from the wide receiver position. I'm in on Polk. I'm certainly in on Jalen McMillan as well.
Jeff Lloyd, Locked On Browns podcast, as always. Great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Jeff.
Oh, anytime, Dave. Best week of the year.
Jeff Lloyd, make sure you check him out. Always really good coverage on the Locked On Browns podcast. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.